Hey there, I'm Raquel Richards, and this is What Are You Drinking? The pod on alcohol. Hey there, this is What Are You Drinking? The pod on alcohol, and I'm Raquel Richards. Now, this podcast is for entertainment purposes only. Don't drink and drive, and don't drink if you're underage. On this episode of What Are You Drinking? I'm going to review Scrumpy. Well, in case you don't know what Scrumpy means, it's another term for cider, usually applied to draught cider. Now, I'm not going to review draught cider, but no, draught ciders do exist. And I'm going to review one of my favorite ciders, and it's the OG of Canadian ciders, the brand, and that is Growers Century Dry Cider. Growers has lots of different ciders, but my favorite is the Century Dry Cider, one that comes in the smallest can. Now, the term hard cider refers to the fact that it contains alcohol. Otherwise, it's just apple cider. We don't call it soft cider because it doesn't have alcohol in it. It's just apple cider. But it's hard cider when it's got the booze in it. Now, cider is one of the oldest alcoholic drinks in the world. It dates back to ancient times. It's an old world beverage. Now, old world ciders typically use naturally occurring yeast that can be found on the fruit itself, on the milling and pressing equipment, and inside the fermentation vessels. This type of fermentation, referred to as wild or spontaneous fermentation, results in a markedly different flavor. A profile cider made with yeast that have been cultured in a laboratory, such as the ciders today. Ciders today are made in labs and aren't really made in the old world way with the milling and pressing equipment and fermentation vessels. That's why some ciders have a tinny taste to them. That's the lab process for you. And ciders, made today, we call them New World ciders. And what that means is they usually have an intense apple aroma, and they will typically be medium to sweet to very sweet. Even if the label claims the cider is dry or off dry, it is sweet. Pay attention to the sugar content. A lot of people like to think that ciders, because it tastes dry, it's dry. No. That's a teaser. That's not true. There can be more sugar in a can of cider than in a bottle of wine or in a citrus beer. So pay attention to that. If that's something that you don't want to be consuming, is a lot of sugar. And there is the carbonation, which will often be medium to high, like what you'd find in a beer. And the yeast character is often unnoticeable, though ale yeast can enhance the impression of the fruit or spice in a cider, and the overall impression is of sweet apple juice, not fermented apple, because it's easier to make it with juice than it is to be making it with real apples. So there we go, hence the lab technology, right? I'm not dissing cider, just letting you know, because many people are very confused with all that, and I get it. It doesn't sound very tasty. But I enjoy my Growers Century Dry Cider more than any other cider I've tried, and I've tried a lot, and I definitely can't drink the sweeter ones at all, the ones that've got the watermelon and peaches and so forth. It's not really my thing. Growers Century Dry Cider is made from fermented apples. It is a dry cider, which means that it is low in residual sugar content and is not as sweet as the other types of ciders. This cider is a little bit more real, shall I say. Now, the Growers brand was founded in British Columbia, Canada, way back in 1920s by the Growers Cider Company, and it has since become one of the most popular cider brands in Canada and most enjoyed, with a higher price, but it is worth them few extra cents. I remember when I was younger, and my first boyfriend really liked it, and he was of legal age. I wasn't, and it was around back then, and he was drinking it, and I was always wondering, what is that? And I tried it, and I thought it tasted awful, but your taste buds change as you grow. They mature. They do. They really do. So I mentioned that cider is ancient and that it's an old world beverage. What's really good about cider is it's gluten-free. Now, that's the one reason why I drink it, and it's an alternative to beer. And I mean, I do drink gluten-free beer, but I find the one that I like a little bit sweet. But we'll be talking about that on another podcast. But cider is gluten-free. And it's also a popular choice for those who prefer a drier, less sweet cider. I'm meaning the grower Century Dry Cider here is a popular choice for those who prefer a drier, less sweet cider. And it pairs well with a variety of foods, including cheese, meats, and spicy dishes. Yummy. It is also commonly used in cocktails, such as a cider mimosa or a cider sangria. Maybe you didn't think of that one, right? And I would say it's a better additive than the cheap wine you would buy to mix with your sangria. I think it's a really good alternative. So maybe check it out. Try it for one of your sangrias. But no, it'll be a white sangria, and buy a dry cider. Don't buy all of the high sugar ones when you're making a sangria, because sangria is sweet enough. Unless you're into that, buy yourself just a nice white cider and whip up a sangria and sit on the back porch. So some boozy news about growers here is back in 1922 in the town of, and I'm not even going to know if I'm going to say this correctly, Sannishin, British Columbia, the growers' fruit packers decided they wanted to do something bigger. So they began looking to find additional market for their berries, because that's what they were producing was berries. And guess what? They produced from these berries. Why, of course, berry wine. They produced berry wine. Their berry wine gained popularity back in 1936, and then they later expanded into brandy and other types of wine. It wasn't until 1962 growers released their first cider, and they began to dominate the Canadian cider market as Canada's original cider brand, otherwise the OG of cider. If you're hesitant to try cider, know that some regions, particularly in the UK and Ireland, cider is traditionally served with ice or a splash of lemonade. This is a must, and it makes it very chilly, and the lemonade, which is my secret weapon in a lot of my mixed drinks, will add a hint of sweetness and flavor. I have to have my cider with ice and a straw in a tall glass. That's how I have to drink my cider. And adding a bit of lemonade to it, bellissimo. So Growers Dry Cider in Canada will run you $3.60 for a 355 ml can. So that can isn't very big. I don't like these big tall cans that we get now. I just find I can't drink it all. There's so much in there. So I appreciate this 355 ml on cider. So I hope I gave you a little bit of background on cider in general, and particularly on grower cider, Century Cider. Now, know that the LCBO in Ontario does not carry this one. You will have to go to places such as the Wine Rack or growers themselves to get this particular cider. So you have to seek it out, wherever you live, and find out how you can get it, because it's not at the LCBO in Ontario, but you can order it from growers themselves. So there you have it. So if you would like another drink, and why not, be sure to visit What Are You Drinking on Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, and YouTube. You can check out for all the links in the bio of the show. And thanks for listening. And until next time.